Hello, and welcome to the Kathleen Spracklin podcast. I am a woman on a mission to gather a cadre of writers, thinkers, and teachers who are transforming the world, one character at a time. And it all starts with one thing: a deep understanding of human motivation, why people do what they do, and the forces that drive them. And I am on a side topic of the Zettelkasten. I'm still at it because I'm still getting questions and feedback from you guys. I love the fact that you're out there and you're getting your Zettelkastens going and you're making it happen. And I'm just thrilled to have a little role in that. So today is the second part of yesterday's podcast. Yesterday, I raised a philosophical question of what do you do when you discover that the same topic has grown up through two different paths in two different places in your Zettelkasten? And I pointed out at that time that no, you don't have to suddenly make a billion zillion links to try and tie them up together. And you certainly don't have to pick up cards and move them and renumber them. Heaven forbid, we never renumber cards. We don't do that. But I told you at that time that what you would simply do would be wait for a card to come along where you're saying, I could link here. I could link here. And that's when you make your join between the two. That's how the two become linked. So, totally coincidentally, and just by absolute happenstance, I coincidentally happened to be perusing the index of this book, and I accidentally stumbled on a wonderful piece of information that would make an excellent linking card. Totally by accident, of course, not so I'd have something to show you. Wink, wink. So, here it is. So, this is the book, The Developing Mind by Daniel Siegel. So, of course, I made a bib card for it, following my normal conventions. We're going to have the down-facing camera in just a minute, so I won't bother to get it super close. And then I actually included in my notes my reason for reading this book today. And I was quite honest about it. I said, diving for a card to connect two separate Zettelkasten regions with the brain as a connection-forming machine. So I literally searched out a card that would be that link that would tie the two together. Okay, then from there, I made my main card, and at this point, I'm going to switch over to the down-facing camera so I can show you how that link happens when you coincidentally stumble across just the right linking concept. See you on the desktop. Okay, so I've got a lot of stuff spread out on my desktop, so let me explain the process. Okay, I began, as we talked about earlier, with this book, The Developing Mind by Daniel Siegel. I created the bib card that went with it, and of course, I added it to my author card for Daniel Siegel. I've had this book for some time, but I haven't done a thorough reading of it yet. But one of the things that I always include when I create a bib card is my reason for reading the book. And as I explained in the introduction, I was literally diving for the magic link between those two sections of my Zettelkasten. So I came up with one that I felt would really do the trick. And here is the main card that I made from it. It's on the topic of metacognition when we're thinking about thinking. And the idea here was the example that was being brought about, pages 293, 294, had to do with a patient who had had an emotional outburst and then had gone into therapy because she realized that the problem was with her, and she wanted to figure out what might be causing the issue. So, of course, consciousness, they point out in the earlier card that I did not make main card for, is that conscious thinking is really basically a small portion of the mind's activity. If you're working in my area, which has to do with the character strengths for fiction writing, then we would say the decisions in the rudder position are rather few. And it's a very specialized area where you're thinking about it. So he's talking about, in this case, a situation where you pull a thought pattern into consciousness so that you can examine it, possibly come up with new outcomes and new connections. Well, that makes it, with the brain being a connection forming machine and having to do with outcomes with relationships, this makes a perfect linking card between those two areas. My thought on this, because as you know, I will never add a new main card unless I also have my own thoughts, is that I compare therapy, which pulls emotional responses into consciousness to try to bring about an understanding. I contrast that with a study of the emotions and the struggles that we use in fiction writing, which starts with the explanation, what's the struggle going on, and then permits discovering times and occasions in one's life when that has shown up. And the interesting thing about that other opposite direction is that you aren't immediately dealing with the aftermath of some explosive event. So it's not as hot to handle. And it can give you some much more objective insights. The downside is that there's, you may not start with the right explanation for why there are 28 character traits, and it might take you quite a while before you get to the one that was key. But that's my thought that I brought to Dr. Siegel's description of metacognition. So then, of course, I pulled, for where to put it, I pulled my index card on the word brain. The brain has been used enough that it's on a card all by itself. And I see those 1Ms and those 3Bs that indicate that I've got a topic going in two different places. And in fact, on these little scratch pads, which I use all the time, I marked two cards that I wanted to pull to see which one would be the best spot to place my new card. As you know, of course, the new card gets to choose its location. So it gets to choose whether it wants to go with 3B, 2B, or 1M, 5B. So I pulled both sets of cards. This first stack is the stack around 1M5E. Oops. I pulled 1M5B, but it turned out that 1M5E was a much better link. That's why I pull cards in the vicinity. And the part that really seemed to match was this card on neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to wire and rewire itself across the lifespan. And it already had a card associated with it that had to do with the concept of heart-brain mental conversations. That seemed to fit really well with Dr. Siegel's idea of pulling a thought pattern into conscious mind for analysis. So that was the one side. Then I pulled cards in the 3B, 2B area. In this one, I had a little bit more general connection, and that was the fact that I had this card which was about the key term index itself, which is a fascinating area to me anyway. And I had noted way back in March 30th of 2022, I had noted that the power of a key term index to generate surprises. And I made the note to myself not to be quick to reject a reference to a matching key term that points to the, quote, wrong area, but go look and ruminate a bit. You might not find a new home for your card, but you'll get a spark of energy, and you might get excitement, and your whole brain will come alive, because our brains are connection forming machines. So this was the part, the brain connection forming machine, that formed the tie to this card. And coming out of this card were some interesting conversations already. The basic idea of our brains being connecting forming machines, that came out of Lisa, what's her last name? Lisa Barrett's How Emotions Are Made. And another card that had to do, very interestingly, with resonance with the idea that our bodies actually vibrate with energy and emotion of others through our limbic system and through the vagus nerves. And that's how we form connections to other human beings. And I thought to myself, I really like this group of cards, this conversation that's going on here, because it's more about the human person. And clearly, Dr. Siegel's study and his therapy with this one patient is about the human person and their connections. So this card gets to choose where it wants to go, and this card chose to be with this group. Okay, so now I know that this card wants to be with this group. And which card did it choose for its parent? It chose this very card, the power of the key term index, with its remark here that our brains are connection forming machines. And this is the one that says, I want to go with that card. Well, it turns out that this card already has two other cards that go with it. So it's time to take a look at these cards, which we just did. And now we have to take a look at a directory card, because this card here already has two cards fighting to be right next to it. We have a directory card and two references. So if this card is going to also go with this same main card, it gets the next number. Metacognition permits new outcomes, new connections. So now we know this card's number. It's 3B2B-3A2. There we have 3B2B-3A2. Now, we're not going to just leave the other side out in the cold. There was a clear linkage there. If this other connection hadn't existed, we would have happily connected this card with the card on neuroplasticity. And so we want to reflect that in our Zettelkasten. And this is exactly when, where, and how the two systems become linked. This card could just as easily have been the child of card 1M5E. And so that means that 1M5E, even though it only had one child card already, needs a directory now, because it's going to have a second entry. And now the second entry is the full address of where that card went. Metacognition permits new outcomes and connections. So now when we pull this card and we see what ties to it, we will immediately know that, oh, we have another tie to it over here in 3B, 2B. And that is exactly and precisely how topics that develop in two different areas of the Zettelkasten become linked. It's through the parent of the new card that notes that I have a child off in 3B, 2B land. Whereas the card where it does go also goes on a directory card, but it's going to get filed right there after I'm done doing my indexing. Got to do my indexing first before I put this one away. Now, another interesting thing, because I always pull groups of cards at one time, I look around because that's where the conversation is happening in the vicinity. And I found this interesting other card at 3B, 2B, 3C. Not directly under this one, but very interesting because this card goes back to the seed of why we ended up with a topic on the brain in the middle of 3B, 2B, which was about language learning. You see, this card talks about the method, the thinking method of teaching languages, which is based on the idea of posing a question and giving your brain time to think. And by thinking through the possible responses in the target language, you actually embed the language into your brain. And so that's how the brain tie-in came in. And there's also the connection of surprise, which was another element that then led to the connections. So this is part of the history of how this region of the Zettelkasten on linguistics ended up having interesting stuff on the brain. But Zettelkastens are like that because they follow trains of thought, and trains of thought can go in any direction. And the power of the Zettelkasten is letting it go in those directions because it's the thoughts that get generated and the ideas that you get to play with and the excitement that comes about when you're thinking about all of these ideas that gives the energy for your work, that gives the emotional link, that you get a tie-in, that it doesn't just enter your short-term working memory to talk about this guy where he's talking about bringing them into working memory for a little while. They don't just go into working memory and drift off into the blue. They go into your conscious thinking and into your subconscious thinking, where we had already noted on our bib card that conscious thinking is but a small portion of the mind's activity. But now this and all of these related concepts are now going to be a part of that bigger activity that's going on in your mind, that's in the mind's subconscious activity. So I hope you enjoyed this discussion of how it is that two disparate sections that end up covering the same topic can end up linking together through a new piece of knowledge, a new thought that develops from another source that could go with either area and performs the link between the two sections so that the thoughts in one tie to the other without having to do a mental dance about, well, how do I link this one with that one and see this and see that? So it happens through the normal connection of the links of the multiple opportunities. And I should make one other note that I didn't show you in the down cards because I hadn't done it yet. This card will now also get a link to the card that could have been its parent. And I use this symbol, a little square box with a plus, and then I put in there the address of the card that could have been its parent. So this now says, see also, let's get it in there, see also 1M5E. So he links back to the card that might also have been its parent, this guy, and this guy, through his directory card, links to this. We always want to have links going both directions. Think about that always in your Zettelkasten. Your bib, when you create a bib card, and now that I have a number, that's the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my bib card. I indicate that I made a main card from it, and I'm going to put its card number. And there on my bib card, I also have the card number that I actually turned into a main card. And I know that I did not make a main card from that one. So that's the complete process. It's sweet, it's delightful. All I have left to do is identify my keywords in my tagline and index this. Then in the process of indexing each of the key terms in this, I will embed not just this entire card, which that tagline will always do for me, but because this was quite an interesting experience of going through all these different cards on my desktop, tonight, as I do this process, that whole rich experience will seep deeper and deeper and deeper into the other part of my brain that continues thinking when my conscious mind isn't focused on it, and will add this tagline as a way in to all of the thoughts that got to go through my mind tonight. It's just the greatest joy, and it's why I am so happy to spend time with you going through the Zettelkasten. And I'm not, of course, locked out on my research because the topics that I choose, guess what? They're the things that interest me. So thank you for sharing this, and keep up those comments and questions if you want me to stay on Zettelkasten. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.